Beneath the surface, a tale of sacrifice and betrayal. Ethan had always been the quiet one in his family. He wasn't the one who painted beautiful landscapes or created masterpieces that hung in the finest galleries. That was Isabella, his younger sister, whose talent seemed boundless and whose success was immediate and unrelenting. Ever since she could hold a brush, Isabella had captured the world's attention with her vibrant paintings, leaving Ethan in the shadows of her brilliance. But it wasn't just her talent that outshone him. It was the way everyone, his parents, his teachers, their friends, treated her like she was the center of the universe. Ethan, on the other hand, was the steady one, the dependable one. He had dreams, two dreams of studying engineering at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. He had worked hard to get the grades, the extracurriculars, the recommendations. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter compared to Isabella's art. It wasn't that Ethan didn't love his sister. He did, in a way that only an older sibling could. But love didn't erase the quiet resentment that simmered just beneath the surface. It wasn't loud or brash. It wasn't even something he often spoke about. No, his resentment was far more subtle. It came in the form of every moment he had to watch his parents pour all their energy into supporting Isabella's career, while his own aspirations slowly slipped further and further away. Ethan was a high school senior, just months away from graduation, when his parents sat him down to talk about his future. The conversation started as it always did, with small talk and pleasantries. But then, his mother's voice grew serious, and the words she spoke hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. "Ethan, we've been talking, and we think it's best if you defer your university application for a year. You know how much this means to your sister. She's been accepted into that prestigious art school, and we think you should stay and help her with her transition. She needs you, Ethan. She's been through so much to get here." Ethan felt the weight of his parents' expectations pressing down on him, suffocating him. There was no room for his own ambitions, no space for his dreams. His sister's future was all that mattered. Of course, he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice in protest. He simply nodded, his heart sinking into his stomach. He was the older brother, the responsible one. If anyone had to make the sacrifice, it was him. The words "you should stay" echoed in his mind, over and over, as he watched his sister bask in the glory of her success. He was happy for her. Yes, but he couldn't help the bitter taste that lingered in his mouth. She didn't even seem to notice how much he was giving up. She didn't know that every time she received another congratulatory message or showed off her latest painting, it was one more reminder to Ethan that his own dreams, his own future, were slipping further away. But he never said a word. He just smiled, played the part of the supportive brother, and quietly watched as everything he had worked for faded into the background. And so, his resentment grew, unspoken and unseen. Every moment felt like a quiet sacrifice, a piece of himself being chipped away in the name of family duty. His own life, his own dreams, seemed like nothing more than an afterthought, a distant echo in the shadow of Isabella's rising star. As the months passed, Ethan's quiet resentment began to bubble up, but he tried to bury it deep. Graduation loomed closer, and with it, the final moments of his high school years. It was supposed to be a time of excitement, a time for him to prepare for his future. But as he watched Isabella continue to receive more praise, more support, and more attention, the cracks in his calm facade began to show. Something didn't sit right. The illusion his family had built around Isabella, this perfect, talented artist, was starting to fray, and Ethan could feel it. First, it was small things. The way Isabella seemed to spend more time on her phone than working on her paintings. The late-night phone calls with friends, the constant posting on social media, the flashy new clothes and accessories she'd begun wearing. Ethan didn't think much of it. She was young, and maybe she was just enjoying the perks of her newfound fame. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice a pattern. Isabella's art wasn't bringing in the money that her followers seemed to think it was. Her bank account, the one that their parents always spoke about with pride, didn't match her growing lifestyle. There was something off about it all, something Ethan couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as he sat in his room, the familiar hum of his laptop filling the air, a thought struck him. He wasn't sure why he did it, but something compelled him to open Isabella's bank app. He'd never snooped before, never thought to invade her privacy. But today was different. Today, the tension had been too much. And as the app loaded, he saw it. A transaction, one after another, payment after payment, all from something called OnlyFans. Ethan's heart raced as he scrolled, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. There it was, clear as day. Isabella had created an account on the adult content platform, raking in thousands of dollars for posting provocative pictures and videos. This was how she was funding her new lifestyle, not through the art that had been so glorified, but through something far more controversial. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. He clicked through more transactions, the reality of it crashing down on him with each new entry. He leaned back in his chair, unable to breathe. His mind raced. This was the sister he had been sacrificing everything for? The sister he'd quietly supported, whose career he'd put on hold, was living a double life that no one had told him about. The betrayal stung, sharp and immediate. This wasn't the path his parents had painted for her. This wasn't the dream they had for her. But she was getting the attention, the fame, the money, everything Ethan had been told he should help her achieve. Why didn't she just tell me? Ethan muttered to himself, staring at the screen. He felt foolish. He had spent all these months believing in her, supporting her from the sidelines, but all the while she had been living a lie. A lie that had built her up even more in their parents' eyes while Ethan's own future slipped further into oblivion. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left Ethan questioning everything, let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself caught in a situation where you had to support someone you loved, only to find out they didn't appreciate it? If so, drop a man-raising hand in the comments below and let me know how you handled it. And if you're already feeling the weight of the story, hit that like button because this is only the beginning. Ethan's head spun. He had been living in a house of cards, believing in something that wasn't real. And now he had no idea how to confront the people who had been so sure of Isabella's path. What was left for him now? The evening was thick with tension. Ethan could feel it in the air, a heaviness that seemed to hang over the entire house. He had barely spoken to Isabella all day, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. It had been too much, too overwhelming to keep it inside any longer. He couldn't pretend, couldn't continue to play the part of the supportive older brother while the world he had built in his mind came crashing down around him. Isabella was in her room as usual, scrolling through her phone, a soft glow illuminating her face. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, the bitter taste of betrayal still lingering in his mouth. He wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but he had to wait. His parents would be home soon and he needed them to be part of this. He needed them to see the truth, to hear his voice for once. The front door opened with a creak and Ethan's parents walked in, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. He watched them exchange pleasantries, their usual cheerful greetings filling the space, oblivious to the tension building inside him. Ethan couldn't take it any longer. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," he said, his voice louder than he intended. His parents looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong, honey?" his mother asked, her voice soft, concerned. But Ethan could hear the underlying sense of dismissal, as though whatever he had to say wasn't as important as whatever was on Isabella's phone. "No," Ethan replied, his words sharper now. "I've been silent for too long and I can't stay quiet anymore. It's time you both finally heard me." His parents exchanged uneasy glances. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" his father asked, his tone more curious than angry. Ethan turned to Isabella, who was still oblivious to the storm brewing. "It's about her," Ethan spat, his eyes burning with years of pent-up emotion. "Isabella, you've pushed me aside for her so-called art career. But this lie, this isn't what you think it is." He turned sharply towards her. "You're not the artist you've made everyone believe. You're not even trying. You've been using your body, your social media following, to fund this whole charade." Isabella froze, her eyes widening with shock, but she didn't respond. Ethan's words were like daggers, piercing the silence that had hung over them for so long. He wasn't going to stop now. "You've been living this perfect little life while I've been sacrificing mine," Ethan continued, his voice rising with each word. "I gave up my dream, my future, all so you could live this fantasy. You got everything, while I stood by, waiting for my turn. And you? You've been hiding behind your perfect little art world while making money doing this." His voice cracked, filled with disgust. His parents' faces were pale, their eyes flicking between Ethan and Isabella. His mother opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan wasn't finished. "You don't see it, do you?" Ethan's voice was trembling now, raw and desperate. "You never saw me. You never saw what I gave up for her. For you. You pushed me aside, told me it was my job to help Isabella, to support her, and look where it's gotten me. I'm still here, stuck, while she gets to live in her little world, building a career out of lies and manipulation. His words hung in the air, sharp and painful. Ethan's chest rose and fell with each breath, his heart pounding in his ears. For the first time, he felt heard. For the first time, his voice cracked through the facade they had all built. Isabella stood up then, her face flushed with anger, her eyes darting between Ethan and their parents. You don't understand, she started, but Ethan wasn't finished. He wasn't going to let her twist this. No, you don't understand, he shot back. I get it. You've been living a double life, fooling everyone, including me. And for what? So you can sit in your pretty little bubble and act like nothing has changed. Isabella took a step back, her eyes brimming with tears, but Ethan didn't soften. His pain was too deep, the betrayal too raw. You're not a victim here, Isabella. You've had everything handed to you and I've been playing the fool, letting you walk all over me. You don't get to pretend anymore. This is the truth. His parents were silent now, their expressions unreadable. Finally, it was his mother who spoke, her voice quiet but filled with regret. Ethan, we didn't know. We didn't know about all this. You didn't know? Ethan barked, his anger rising again. How could you not know? How could you let this happen while I sat here, doing everything you asked? My future doesn't even matter to you, does it? All that mattered was Isabella's art, her success, and I was just supposed to fade into the background. His father finally stepped forward, his eyes soft but apologetic. Ethan, I'm so sorry. We should have seen what was happening. We should have supported you more. But we thought we were doing what was best for everyone. We were wrong. The words hit Ethan like a wave, but the anger didn't fade. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Not until he found his own voice again. He looked at Isabella one last time, his eyes filled with both fury and pain. This isn't about art, Isabella. It's about truth. And I'm done living in a lie. The room fell silent, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. His voice had been heard. And no matter what came next, he had taken the first step toward reclaiming his future. In the weeks that followed, the house felt different. The tension had dissipated, but an uncomfortable silence lingered in the corners of every room. Ethan had spoken his truth, and though his family had yet to fully grasp the magnitude of his words, they could no longer ignore the cracks in the foundation they had built. Isabella was quieter now, her usual confidence replaced with a quiet discomfort. The reality of her actions had sunk in, and there was no hiding from it. She no longer spoke of art schools or gallery openings. Instead, she focused on rebuilding the trust she had lost, not just with Ethan but with their parents as well. The once golden child was now left to reckon with the choices she had made, choices that had torn the family apart. Ethan, however, felt an unexpected weight lifting off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he was free. Free from the invisible chains that had bound him to his sister's shadow. Free from the expectations that had dictated his every move. He realized that, in his quiet sacrifices, he had lost sight of who he was and what he wanted. Now, with his future in his hands, he could finally pursue his own dreams. He spent late nights poring over university applications, this time with a sense of determination that had once seemed impossible. Engineering. The field that had always called to him, the one he had abandoned for the sake of others. It was no longer just a distant dream, it was his future. He applied to the top schools, universities he had once thought were out of his reach. He wasn't doing this for anyone but himself, and for the first time, that felt right. There was a calmness in Ethan now, a clarity that hadn't existed before. He no longer felt like he was living in someone else's story. The journey he had been on of sacrifice, of quiet resentment, was over. He had reclaimed control of his life, and with that he had found peace. When the acceptance letters came, Ethan didn't jump for joy. There was no need for dramatic celebration. He had already found his victory in the simple act of choosing himself. His parents, though still unsure of how to navigate the changes in their family dynamic, saw the quiet resolve in his eyes. They saw the man he was becoming, someone who had finally stopped living for others and started living for himself. As the days passed, Ethan found himself looking at Isabella with a mixture of understanding and distance. She was no longer his responsibility, and though their relationship would never be the same, Ethan knew that he could no longer allow her actions to define his worth. The resentment that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by something more powerful: acceptance. For Isabella, the journey would be different. She would have to confront the consequences of her actions, and while Ethan couldn't predict where her path would lead, he knew that it would no longer intersect with his in the same way. They were on separate journeys now, their lives taking new directions, and that was okay. Ethan had found his own way, and that was enough. The family dynamic had shifted, yes. But in that shift, something new had emerged, a recognition that sometimes the greatest love you can give your family is the courage to walk away from their expectations and create your own path. Ethan had learned that, and in doing so, he had found his true strength. As he stood at the edge of this new chapter, Ethan felt a sense of empowerment unlike anything he had ever known. The road ahead was his to walk, and for the first time in his life, it was no longer about what others wanted for him, it was about what he wanted for himself. And that, he realized, was the most powerful choice he could ever make.